What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys that was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success and Now listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Don't forget to follow, subscribe, share, like, do all that stuff. It helps the show. Okay, folks, I've got a guy here that he's real smart, and he's an inspiring guy, and he's really doing good stuff. His name's Chip Skowron, and he's got a fascinating story. And we've been talking for the last couple of months. I'm really glad that we've been able to connect because he's just doing really good work in this reentry space. And I'm all about the whole reentry world and seeing how we can make it better for the people trying to get back into society. But a little bit about Chip. Meaning he's a smart guy. He attended and graduated from Yale Medical School. He did his residency in orthopedic surgery at Harvard, and then he just totally switched gears. I think he got a little bit frustrated with some of the things, and we could probably maybe talk about a little bit of that. But he became a portfolio manager at Front Point Partners Healthcare Funds. And as I read, it was one of the largest funds on Wall Street. It was a big deal. It was big time. Things got wacky and crazy, and Chip ended up getting convicted of insider trading and was sentenced to a 5-year federal sentence. Chip, since then, man, this guy has dedicated himself to giving back, using his experience to help others through their reentry journey back into society. He's now the CEO of Prison Entrepreneurship Program, whose mission is to transform inmates and executives by unlocking human potential through entrepreneurial passion, education, mentoring. PEP's groundbreaking results. Listen to these results. These are results that you don't hear about. Include a return to prison rate of less than 5%. So for those out there that follow news and hear the bad narrative, that number is usually at 75%. So this is less than 5% what PEP is doing. Employment, 100% within 90 days. That's almost, when I read that, it's unheard of. It's incredible. And there's been over 100 businesses launched. These results are incredible. I can't wait to jump into all this with Chip. Before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. You know, who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots, looking for a car, and then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy the car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They are your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you, negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Chip, welcome in, my man. How are you?
Brent, you are a pro, man. That was really good.
Don't let anybody do this, Chip.
I am humbled. It's good to be here, Brent. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, we were just talking. I wish we would sometimes record this stuff before we get on, because you're in a new position, and I couldn't be more excited for you, because we're going to get into all of your background stuff, but you are the right man at the right time in the right spot to be doing what you're doing. And you've got that passion, man. You've got that thing. When I started talking to you, I thought, man, I want to stay connected to Chip, because he's got whatever that is. You know, when somebody walks into a room, whatever that is, you've got that passion vibe. And that's, you know, I'm sure that's what was your driving force getting you through all your stuff as you were growing and doing in your world. But take us back a little bit, Chip. I've read your background story. Tell us about little Chip growing up. I think you were down in Florida. What was life like? What was happening in your world?
I mean, I grew up in actually comparatively very good circumstances. My dad was a rocket scientist. You know,
whose dad's a rocket scientist?
Yeah, no, for real. he moved down to Cocoa Beach, Florida, because he got recruited to, build rockets.
Wow.
And my mom and a whole bunch of other women were recruited to come down there because they needed secretaries and school teachers and all of that. So they kind of, the government built this community out of nothing in a swamp. And that's Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center. So
Right.
I grew up there. My dad, it turns out, was an entrepreneur. And after 25 years in the space business, working on Apollo and Minuteman and Beaumark and Atlas and Mercury and even the shuttle missions, he left and started his own business. He became a Long John Silver's franchisee.
How about that? I used to
Yeah,
love Long John Silver's, the chicken
man.
planks and the
Well,
fries.
listen, I used to cook them for you. I mean, I would cook them for guys like you because, my dad decided I needed to learn how to work. And
Uh-huh.
so when I was 16 years old, I had to work in the restaurants, and I was a first mate, dropping hush puppies and chicken
Mm-hmm.
planks and fish and all of that. And, eventually got to the point where he had to fire me. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, look, I mean, I was a kid who was, although I was a good student and I was, very focused at performing,
Mm-hmm.
I was also kind of a mess inside. And, after work, let my friends in the back door. And, in those days, Long John Silver had a keg of beer. And
That's
we would
great.
drink the beer and,
Keg of beer for teenagers can go a long
yeah,
ways.
and hot grease.
And hot grease. Keg of beer and hot
So,
grease.
but I was a troubled kid. So again, on the one hand, straight A's and captain of the soccer team and number one on the tennis team and all that stuff. And on the other hand, severe drug addiction,
And
really.
where did that come from, Chip? Like, how did you find your way into that?
Well, I'll tell you, I
Because
was,
I mean, you would almost have to. Because we both played sports in high school and that, and you almost, because you have to dedicate yourself to so much time to it, that you almost have to have somebody that pulls you out of that, and you live two separate lives almost. How'd that happen?
so, I was aware that I was different in a
Yeah.
lot of ways and I didn't feel like I fit in. And what I found after that first, smoke of a joint was I was accepted. And so I started down that journey of just, being one of the cool kids trying to fit in,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, was able to, for a long time, walk that very, very scary line of continuing to keep up the facade and appear
Mm-hmm.
to be the guy that had it all together while I was falling apart. And that's something that would echo in my life years later. But
So,
if my mom hadn't found out,
no,
Graham,
that's what I was just going to ask you, Chip. Was that something that you kept so secret that your parents didn't know about it, or were they aware of it and they were trying to help you through it? And
no,
how?
listen, I was stealing money from my parents.
Okay.
I was, hiding. I was living a double life,
Yeah.
and scary that even at that age I was good at it.
Mm-hmm. And how old would you have been?
Well, it really got bad when I was 15,
Okay.
and by the time I was 16, that's when my mom found out.
Okay. And then what
And,
happened with that?
well, I'll tell you, my mom was a born again believer.
Yeah.
And she did what the Bible said she should do. She called the elders of the church, and we went to the church at 10 o'clock at night, the night she found out. And these men laid hands on me and prayed for me, and the addiction left.
Wow.
I never touched cocaine again. I never touched crack again.
So what was the next
Crazy.
step for you? If that was out of your life and you were living this double life, how did you take the next step forward?
So although those things left me, I was not ready to surrender my life to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to be in control. Because I had to prove to everyone, including my dad, that I could be worthy of praise. And so for me, that looked like going to medical school, and that had been my kind of my guiding post for my whole
Mm-hmm.
life. It had been the thing that had allowed me to endure and propel myself through a whole bunch of adversity. But, you know, that was the thing that kept me going.
So, and I think your dad, you know, reading about this, your dad would have been a tough guy to follow. I mean, he was a doer and an entrepreneur and a rocket scientist.
Still,
Yeah,
still is a
but
doer.
there was a thing that happened, and I forget where I read it, Chip, where your dad had a fall. How old were you when that happened? Because that would have been pretty. I think
So
that would have
I was,
really shaken up a kid at that
yeah, I
whatever
was
age you would have
11.
been.
My
Yeah.
dad was power cleaning the second floor of the house, and he fell, and he was working with my older cousin at the time. And my older cousin, you know, had a look of panic on his face, and I ran outside. They were going to call 911 and to get help for my dad, and he had fallen between the house and a flight of stairs. And so I was looking down into kind of this pit and seeing my dad crumpled, you know, in the bottom of that pit just terrified me. You
Mm.
know, I think like many kids, you know, my dad was bigger than life. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
was a bigger than life guy. You know, he was a rocket scientist and
Mm-hmm.
he was a businessman and he had people working for him and people saluting him. And, you know, he was bigger than life.
Mm-hmm.
And to see him like that and to be helpless, you know, brought me to the place at that moment where I made a vow. And I didn't recognize this until decades later,
Mm-hmm.
but I made a vow that I would never be helpless again.
Mm.
And that vow led me to decide to go to medical school where I would be equipped and I would learn how to manage any situation so that I wouldn't be helpless ever again.
Wow, it's interesting. And were you an only child, or did you have siblings?
I had an older sister who was 10 years older
Oh, wow, that's a lot older.
that my mom had from another marriage, and then
Okay.
a younger sister who was 2 years younger. And I
Okay, so
still
you
have
were
both of them, and they're amazing.
and you were the middle. Okay.
Well, I kind of grew up as the older.
Well, I would think so with 10 years difference. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a lot different. I mean, when you're in school, they're way out and you know,
yeah,
that would be different.
yeah. I was the typical, you know, oldest
Uh-huh.
child, kind of performing and trying to measure up. The prodigal son child, you know.
So what was it like with you know, your mom going through that? You go to medical school, you do well. I mean, you go to Yale, you know, that's one of those things where did you go to medical school? Oh, I went to Yale. I mean, that's a big deal. Did you feel like that was a climb to the top of the peak there, that you had conquered whatever this is in your head, that I'm that guy?
Well, so the entry into that season of my life came quite traumatically. On the day that the dean of the medical school called to personally welcome me into what they called the medical scientist training program, which was a full ride to the medical school. I sat with that information, that phone call. I sat with that for about 20 minutes alone. Just as you said, wow, this is
Big
this
deal.
is the pinnacle. This is
Uh,
this is the my life's achievement.
Right.
Next phone call, 20 minutes later, was my father telling me my mom had been killed in a car accident.
Oh my gosh.
And that kind of sent me spinning. It sent me emotionally into a place that I had no idea how to recover from. And I'd already largely left home, was not really connected to home much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And now I was being sent out with this just feeling of abandonment, feeling of, betrayal, that God hadn't allowed me to share this incredible news with my mom, that
Mm-hmm.
she had been my biggest cheerleader. So, yeah, it was
That's
that was
amazing that happened in that time sequence. That's incredible.
Yeah,
I
and
didn't.
I was talking about it today at lunch. It's the kind of thing though that set me up so that every good thing that happened to me subsequent to that,
Mm-hmm.
I was conditioned by that wound to always be expecting the other shoe to drop.
Something else to happen.
So I
Yeah.
I never really fully enjoyed any good thing
And that's
because of
something.
that, innate wound, that fear.
Well, let's talk about, because you go into not just being a doctor, but going overseas and doing surgeries. And how did that even come about?
Well, uh, I met this girl who became my wife, but her father, my father-in-law, had been affiliated with a group called AmeriCares in Connecticut, which
Okay.
at the time was one of the largest private disaster relief organizations in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was training to be a surgeon, and the idea of traveling around the world and showing up just in the nick of time and making a difference. I mean, it was a really attractive thing to me. So I went on my first trip with them in 1994 and just fell in love with people that were hurting and so grateful to see us show up. It was a really amazing part of my life, but looking back on it, um, I will say this: it was largely a selfish thing that I was doing.
Hmm.
I wasn't really doing it for them. It was really about me. And I did have amazing experiences. I met amazing people and AmeriCares became a very important part of my whole life journey.
Mm-hmm.
I stayed with them and worked with them. I later joined the board and, just loved the people, and they were an amazing group of people that loved me when my life fell apart.
Mm. That's interesting. I didn't know that. So you take a you take a life turn, but when I say that, it wasn't outside of your field, which is interesting. It was a $1 billion healthcare fund. So it was you had and knew and your history was, but you had an interest in those fields of research. So it wasn't like you just went from being a doctor to a San Francisco tech guy. This was moving into a world where there was some familiarity. But what made you make that jump?
There medicine was in a state of transition, and where I was training, I was looking at these incredible men, these captains of
Mm-hmm.
healthcare technology. They were developing, pushing the boundaries of what was happening in orthopedics, um, and yet almost to a man. So I had no female attending surgeons; they were all men. Um, I don't know of any that were at the time really happy, seemed happy in
Mm-hmm.
their life, in their family life. Most of them, their marriages have fallen apart. I mean, these were men that were really passionate, committed,
Mm-hmm.
maybe beyond healthy boundaries to the practice of medicine. Anyway, so it came to the point where I was trying to decide, okay, so for the rest of my life, I'm going to be a reconstruction guy, a joint reconstruction guy. I'm going to be a spine guy, or I'm going to be a trauma guy, or I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
start to put myself into a bucket. And the prospect of that rest of my life idea really became daunting.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a morning when I was in the hospital and I was on call, and it was my wife and I had our first child, and Carly was they were celebrating Easter, and I was on call, and I couldn't go be with them on Easter morning and go to church with them. And so it was kind of one of those moments where I said, is this really what I want? Am I going to go down this road and become one of these guys who I can see what this has done to their lives, how it's consumed them? And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I just basically told my chairman, who was an amazing guy, Dr. Dr. Herndon. And I said, listen, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I need to go figure something out. And he said, listen, we're going to give you a sabbatical. We'll give you a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him, I said, listen, I don't need that. I know I'm making a change here. And so I began to look at other industries, and it just so happened that I didn't know anything about the hedge fund world, zero. And I walked into an office in New York, and um, just things went so right, I couldn't possibly say no.
Mm.
I mean, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And so
And
I
they were
found
and they were looking for guys like you.
at the time they were, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, I had no idea what SAC Capital was. I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and so I would moved from Boston down to Connecticut and began commuting into New York and went to work. Way over my head.
But you got really good at it.
I got good at parts of it, and the parts that I wasn't good at, I was really keen on finding people that could do those parts. And
Mm-hmm.
so a couple of years later, when the opportunity presented itself, that's when I reached out to the people that could plug those holes in my own life and my own capability. And we created Front Point Healthcare Fund. And I mean, I was really good at telling the story. And
Mm-hmm.
as a group, we were really good at managing a portfolio, managing risk, and it resonated. And we had, you know, way more success than I could have ever dreamed of.
And that's the crazy thing about your story. You have this incredible success, and you're in a great community. It's a community of success. I mean, there's, when I was in Nantucket, I was there for 18 years. There's so many layers of, and Connecticut and Greenwich it's that world. But you moved around in that world and became part of that world. When when was it, Chip, that you felt like something wasn't right? Was it a surprise that someone was coming down on you in a way that could change your life?
Well, I was certainly intoxicated by the world I was in, for sure. I
Mm,
was certainly enjoying all of the comforts and
yeah.
the pleasures of it. And it was a very unhealthy place to be. And to a certain extent, I was aware of it, but I was definitely not going to be able to save myself from it. There was
Hmm.
no way I could rescue myself.
Hmm.
And when I was, you know, pretty far along the road, probably back, I'm going to say, probably a year and a half before everything blew up, I was having a conversation with my older sister.
Okay.
And I remember very clearly telling her, so I'm married, I have the children, I have the house, I have the cars, I have the vacation house, I have all these things. Is this all there is to life?
Mm,
So all of these things that I've been trying to accumulate to try to satisfy, some vacancy in my soul, none of it was meeting that desire, that need. I didn't know what would. And and yet my sister had a very clear picture at that point. And Cindy began to pray for me. And she had been praying for me, but now she knew things were coming to a head. And and it wasn't that much longer after that, it was November 4th, 2010, that everything came to a stop. I mean, a sudden stop.
so when it came to a sudden stop, did your wife know anything about it? Did the kids know anything about it? Or was it one of those things that just hit?
Well, remember back when I was 15, I was really good at living a secret life.
Yeah.
So I
Double
had
life.
I had a secret life. And so while there were headlines about a criminal investigation, perhaps Front Point was involved, perhaps this guy who was a portfolio manager had been involved, those headlines were certainly daunting, very scary. Front page of Wall Street Journal, it was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of embarrassment, a lot of very, very uncomfortable. No one had any idea up until that day that there was anything criminal going on. I knew that it was just the tip of the iceberg,
Mm,
that there was a whole bunch more behind that, about my life that was really rotten.
mm.
And so unraveling all of that was a process that took months. And it was the New Canaan Society, this group of men, this group of Christian men who I was introduced to, that came around me. I did not know them. I didn't even know they existed until this had happened. And they loved me, and they gave me the room and the space to really be real about what was going on, not the headlines,
Mm-hmm.
but the real stuff that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was a mess. I was not the husband that my wife thought I was. I was not a good father. I was a deceiver and a manipulator, and it was not pretty.
And Chip, how did these guys find you? I mean, what
I
was the
found them.
connection?
So, to be clear, I didn't even find them. I mean, so I was sitting in a meeting one day at the Greenwich Leadership Forum, and it was a Friday morning, and I had heard about this group, and I'm sitting there, and the guy next to me said, I mean, he just whispers, and he had no idea who I was. He said, listen, if you think this is good, you ought to check out the New Canaan Society. And I was like, all right, thanks. Appreciate the heads up. I walked out of the door, and my sister from California calls me. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, her time. And she says, I know where you need to go, the New Canaan Society.
Mm.
And I said to myself, well,
I probably ought to check this out.
weird enough that I need to go figure that out. And when I showed up, I found something that I didn't even know it could exist. A group of men that gather together on a regular basis and are actually authentic, that are actually real. That is not something that was part of my life at all. You go to work and you have to put on a front. It doesn't matter what's going on at home.
Right.
You have to show up and be the captain. And then, if you're out with your buddies and, you're doing that, you're not sharing the trouble in your life or your business with them. It's, you just go from one. I was going from one basically performance to another.
How long did the nightmare part of getting noticed, being indicted, to figuring out being sentenced, how long did that take?
Well, so November was the awareness of the criminal investigation. It was August. So from November to August was the journey of coming to faith, confessing everything, and then pleading guilty, being indicted and pleading guilty, which, in federal indictment land is like the shortest time ever.
I was just gonna say that's I went 6 years. That's the short. Those are months and not year. But it doesn't change anything. The fight is the same. You wake up with it. You go to bed with it, and then you've finally realized that, okay, then I'm going to do this plea. How did that all handle out, and with your wife and kids and all that was going on? Because obviously it affects you, but when somebody goes to prison, their family basically goes to prison, because everybody has to handle that in their own way. And I'm just saying that from experience. I have 3 daughters and a wife, and we all had to go through it in our own way. I went to prison, but they were on prison on the outside. And how was it for you and your family? Because you guys you're one of the small percentage where you guys stayed together.
Yeah, and by the way, that's all God and my wife. I mean, I get no credit in that. The credit I get is burning the marriage to the ground. And the time frame is one where, the New Canaan Society becomes a part of my life. I come to a completely new relationship with God. I mean, I had no idea how religiousness had basically, shackled me for my whole life. And suddenly I come into a saving relationship with Jesus. That was in April. That led me to really a profound month of really being able to see just how, at least a glimpse of how broken my life really was, of the lies and the deceit and the mess that my life was,
Mm-hmm.
and then confessing that. Then it came to the point where, okay, you have to make a decision. Everybody who goes through this has to make a decision. The decision is very simple. Are you going to cooperate with the government and get other people in trouble?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to plead guilty, or are you going to fight and plead innocent and try to go to trial? I mean, everybody who goes through this has to make that decision. The decision was being made by me at a meeting in the Bank of America building in New York on the day that the earthquake struck Washington, D.C. and damaged the Washington Monument. That was the day they evacuated the building. We were in. And I was in the midst of making the decision, and they evacuated the building. We were the only ones left in the building. Our lawyer said, just stay here, it'll be fine. And I said, I'll do it. I'll plead guilty. I'll go to prison. And that was the beginning of then they go back to the prosecutors. They have the conversation. Okay, we're willing to plead guilty to this.
Mm-hmm.
And that set up everything that followed. So that's the plea. And then you go through the pre-sentencing report and,
right.
and that portion of it. And then you have the sentencing, and then you report to prison. And that took from August until January 6th.
Okay.
And I reported to prison after Christmas and New Year's, January 6th.
Yeah, yours was like I got 5 years, and I reported January 14th of 2014. So I went through the whole, almost like Dead Man Walking through Thanksgiving and Christmas. And it's just a really strange thing.
And no one would ever listen to us.
No.
But I guarantee you would give the same advice. Listen, just go in.
Yeah. Get it started. Get it started. Well, I want to talk about the getting in. And before we do, I want to recognize Nightmare Success Podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group, the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you there's a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom, Mondays, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. For information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So it's so true. You feel like, once you're sentenced, you just want to start. You just want to get going, to get, time, clock, start, go.
Well, for me, that was in retrospect.
Yeah.
At the time, I wanted to stay out.
Well, sure. Exactly. No, that's, tell me a little bit, like leading up to like the night before you went, what was that like for you?
So, certainly one of the scariest seasons was in the days and weeks before the indictment, right? Because you didn't know if they were going to rappel down off the roof and come in with TV cameras and SWAT teams and hold your children at gunpoint, right? That was a real concern. But in the weeks before reporting, I was feeling very, I was aware that there was a huge transition about to happen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know how prison was going to affect me. I had no clue, but I knew it was going to be profound. So I was in a mode of really sending messages to my future self and to my children. My kids were young, right?
Mm-hmm.
My oldest was 12, my youngest was 5.
Okay.
And I was basically abandoning them
mm-hmm.
for what would amount to 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And so I was writing letters, making videos for them, telling them how much I love them, and really spending a lot of time on my knees, praying about what would be coming, and that it wouldn't be for a wasted season.
Mm-hmm.
I the way I was looking at this, I'd gone to college for 4 years. I had done 7 years getting my medical degree and my PhD. I had done 4 years of orthopedic residency. I could do 4 years.
Yeah.
I know what those blocks of time look like.
Right.
And this is just another season of growth, maturity, and an opportunity to do something that I do not want to do, but I'm going to have to do it. So I may as well buck up and, go do it.
Yeah.
And my goodness, those 4 years were the best education of my life.
And I got to tell you, because you and I have talked about this, and I've read about what you've said, that's probably one of the biggest surprises about going into prison, is that you find that there's some really good people in there. My thought was, what you see is, I was standing at the gates of Leavenworth thinking, okay, I'm probably getting a fight. Maybe, do I get raped? You think all these crazy things. Am I going to get stabbed? And,
You are a handsome man, Brent.
When I get down to the camp, though, it's like, immediately I've got this bunkmate that's, you know, he's helping me clean my locker and showing me how to make my bed. And it's like 100%, 180 degrees different than what I had even thought within the first hour. And, you know, that's, I think, one of the greatest things that stays with me is the perspective I gained from that, that I always want to hear the story because, you know, these people who were in there have these incredible background stories that hardly ever get told. And the judgment part of things is I always just want to, you know, hear what's your story, because the story is so interesting, and their background and the environment and everything of how somebody gets to where they are. But anyway, you walk in and something interesting happens is the guy comes up to you and says, "I'm Chip."
Yeah.
Now that's, to me, blows my mind because
there are only 6 of us in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I meet Chip. So this guy, Chip Trimble, who remains a very dear friend of mine. But yeah, he was the guy. And so I said, "Hey, I'm Chip." And he puts his hand out first and said, "I'm Chip." And I said, "Oh, I'm Chip too." And he goes, "Remember that.
Remember your Chip too."
I'm Chip 1. So immediately his head goes like, but then he looked at my Bible, Brent, and he said, "Just remember, all things work together for the good." And I said back to him, "For those who love God and are called according to his purpose." And he said, "My brother." And he embraced me. And that's how I was welcomed, as you were, by a brother who was showing you and taking care of you.
Yeah.
And that's what I found largely throughout my entire journey there. I was loved and cared for.
Chip, here's the thing that I find fascinating about your experience, and I wanted to talk to you about it because when you started pulling guys into your world orbit of them being vulnerable, that's not something that's very common in prison. I mean, I noticed in RDAP that there was some vulnerability that happened and it didn't leave, you know, after that, it didn't leave the room, but you were doing it at the bunk side area where, you know, these guys were totally voluntary, but you were creating a society within a society of people who were giving and taking, and being very vulnerable in a space that, you know, people try to put on a face in prison that, you know, don't bother me, I won't bother you, it's about respect, all that kind of stuff. But how did that evolve?
Well, I mean, it started before I went in. It started with the New Canaan Society, with these men modeling what that could look like. And like I said, I'd never seen men do that before. I'd never seen a man get up and start to talk about his life and then begin to weep in front of other men, and had men come around him and hug him and pray for. I mean, that's not the model of manhood that I was shown.
Right.
And
we see that as weakness, is what we're taught.
Yeah.
In the society that we've grown up in, is men can't weep. Men have to stand strong, and vulnerability is a weak thing, and all those things that you roll around in your head, and we're grown up that way.
Well, Brent, and so this is just one of many things that I learned, how in the kingdom of heaven, almost everything, it could be everything, but almost everything so far that I've seen is turned upside down. And so, yes, I was taught that being strong meant, you know, stiff upper lip, keep marching forward, you know, put a smile on your face. And where now I have come to learn that it actually takes an extraordinary strength to be able to stand there and weep and bare your soul in front of a man. Anyway, so in prison, what happened was, you know, despite the fact that I was going to church now in prison, and I was participating in Bible studies, and I was part of the praise and worship team, I was doing all these things, I didn't have the kind of relational intimacy, the closeness with other people there yet that I was really, really missing, that I felt I needed in my soul. And so I was lonely despite all those things that I was doing. And I was praying about that. I was actually asking God to send me a friend. And one night, a man walked into my cell. His name was Biggs, and I was not evangelizing or proselytizing. I was depleted. I was depressed, and the only thing I had the energy to really talk about was how Jesus was my hope. And I don't even remember what the conversation was like, but it lasted for 4 hours. And when they called count, the bridge between dinner and count time is like, 3
Yeah.
hours.
Yeah.
And that time went by so fast that when they called count, it was like we both came out of a trance and we were like, whoa, what just happened? He left. And the next morning when I saw him, he came up to me and he's a
Now,
big
if I
guy.
remember right, Chip, he was the record producer. I can't remember the record label.
Rockefeller Records.
Jay-Z. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I didn't know who that was either. And I didn't know him. Everyone else knew him, but I didn't.
Right.
But he came up to me the next morning and said, "What did you do to me?"
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Yo, Biggs, what do you mean?" He
Mm-hmm.
said, "Listen, I've been floating around all night. My body feels like it's tingling, and I can't stop thinking about Jesus." And I said, "Well, that wasn't me. That's the Holy Spirit, and we should probably talk." And that friendship became the nucleus of this relational fellowship that was, we were
Two guys on the opposite side of the world.
so excited, all of us, everyone who joined that group, and we still communicate. In fact, I just hired my bunkie from that group to work with us here. And
I love that.
we were so excited to be together, whether it was, breakfast, in the gym, and workout, whatever it was. We just wanted to be together. And people began to notice. And pretty soon, some crazy things started to happen in the prison. And that was none of that was intentional. It was just the joy of being together. And that was all born out of the New Canaan Society.
Mm.
It's just that almost that spark in prison lights a fire. It's like there's dry kindling in prison, whereas out here it's kind of damp.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes more.
Yeah, because everybody's right here. That's why it can be easily triggered in prison. The people are just right there, and if you can throw something good in that arena, then it's something that can really attach itself. Which is, so this thing grows when you're getting close to getting released. You've had all this experience with this prison world that has really actually been something that I can tell by the way you talk about it. It filled you up. What were you thinking as you were stepping out? What were you thinking? This is going to be something in my world that I'm going to do, or what was Chip thinking as you were getting close to the door? Because a lot of weird things happen when you're getting close to the door. It's like, oh my God, I'm going back out. I hope I didn't turn into prison, Brent. But I mean, what were you thinking?
I was I was focused on, number one, figuring out how I could love my wife and begin to repair that damage. Being reconnected with my family was important, but yes. So in terms of like what I was going to do, my only thought was, no matter what I do, being with and being a part of prison ministry is going to be right there with me. That is always going to be something.
No matter what.
And what happened was I came out, and it was just so much worse than I could ever have imagined.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand, I guess, how dependent and I don't know, connected I was to the fellowship on the inside. And so when I came out and I didn't have that, I had some semblance of it. I started going to Bible study, and even the New Canaan Society, although it was good, it was just a dim shadow of what I had on the inside. So it felt like a very dry place, and things at home were very challenging. So life was hard, man. And that's what led me, in my mind, and I know it leads many guys who come home, because I talk with them all the time, every day, to say, man, I'd just be better off back inside.
Yeah.
Because, the fact of the matter is, I at least know there I'm known and loved.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I don't have freedoms, and I don't have all those other things that.
But you felt alienated on the outside. Yeah. You felt shunned, and the reentry was a lot harder than anybody can ever explain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy crazy hard. And these conversations, and however you want to measure recidivism aside, whatever you think the number is, we always frame the question in terms of, oh, how can we get the recidivism rate is so high at 70%? And you and I've talked about this. My view is that actually at 70%, and considering what these guys come home to, that's actually remarkably low.
It's pretty incredible. And it kind of leads you back to it always brings me to, when we're talking about reentry, that whole things with Brooks and Red and Shawshank. Brooks, he just decided it wasn't for him, and he checked out. And the difference with Red is he had Andy Dufresne, who had given him hope, and instead of he looked up at that the beam that Brooks hung himself from, and he decided that he was going to go check out what Andy had talked about. And Andy said, if you've made it this far, then you got to go further. And the whole thing from that point on, Red is all about I hope. And I think that's the biggest piece of reentry is that a lot of people just lose hope. They don't have a reason to take that next step because there's so many barriers, so they just turn back around. Or worse.
One of the things I've learned about hope is, Brent, if you and I had come out together, there are days where I could borrow your hope.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's the beauty of that community, right? I mean, that community, if somebody falls, that community is not going to let you stay on the ground. We're going to pick you up. And I didn't have that. And what I've found in this journey of prison ministry is that there are actually a whole bunch of organizations that are really committed and determined to picking guys up when they come out. And unfortunately, the institutional barriers are so profound, and there are so many guys that there are literally hundreds of thousands that are still completely abandoned.
Or they just don't know where to go. And I think that's really part of your inspiring journey is that you recognize that you started going back in because you were feeling like you were missing something, and you started going back into the prison.
Yeah, within two. Well, I tried to go back in. So I started a prison ministry, and everyone was approved to go in except me, including other guys who were on probation, by the way.
So what was the deal? I didn't know this story.
We still don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
But I can say this, that that season of not being able to go in, as hard as it was, gave me the focus of praying over the ministry. So I would show up at the prison, I would pray over everyone, and then they would go in. And then they would come out and they would share with me what happened. So my only participation was my prayer participation. And the fact of the matter is, by faith I know this, that my prayerful participation with anything, including raising my children, my marriage, all of those things, my prayerful participation is in fact the most important thing I could do. So that year and a half, 2 years of not being able to physically participate on the inside was actually very instructive to me, as hard as it was. I mean, I would leave after praying and literally weep as I walked in my car in the parking lot, because those guys were getting to go be with my brothers and I couldn't go.
Did people around you in your world on the outside think you were crazy? That you were...
They still do. Did they? Come on. You tell me nobody thinks you're crazy? Yeah, you're fried, dude.
You've got a guy. What I mean though, Chip, is a guy that, living the way that you were living in the place that you were living, and you do your time, and then you want to go back in. And I'm sure people just didn't understand that in a way that you could probably explain it, that they could understand. I'm thinking that those people became an outside bubble of your world, and this world became your real world.
I think that's true. Although, we're often called to go be in those places that are outside our bubble. And I spend a lot of time there, but, in the same way that, a fighting man, signs up to go back to the front line after his tour is over. That
Right.
doesn't make any sense, right?
Right.
In the same way that we know there are stories of rescued women from brothels who get put up into a hotel, but they go back to the brothel.
Right.
It is not about my physical safety that determines where I'm safe.
Yeah.
I feel safe where I'm known and loved. And for me, that place more than any is prison.
Yeah. Well, the thing of it is that what's so encouraging is that I'm not sure how PEP and you found each other, but what they're doing and what you're doing and how you guys came together seems like a match made in heaven, because all the experiences that you had over these years, and then you get into an organization that has the real purpose of mentoring and showing people how to take it to the next step or build a business, or all these things that are so important to reentry. And you already understand that. How did that all happen?
Well, I can't say exactly. Any of us know how the original contact was made. So honestly, nobody really remembers. It was 5 years ago.
Okay.
They asked me to come speak, and at the time, they presented me obviously with an opportunity to speak, which about guys who were coming home from prison. That and
Right.
entrepreneurship. That's an interesting topic. But
Mm-hmm.
the thing that really intrigued me, the thing that really grabbed me, was they had started a community development financial institution called Entree Capital.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, what is that? And they said, listen, we understand that guys coming home are basically prevented institutionally from having access to the banking sector.
Yep.
And Brent, the week before, I had just been kicked out of my third bank.
So you knew it real well.
Oh, and all of the fear and all of the ideas, well, how am I ever going to fill in the blank if I can't have a bank account? And suddenly these guys had an institution, a CDFI, that was going to only loan money to men who had come home from prison who wanted to start businesses.
It's huge.
So I immediately said, I'm going to be your first investor, and I'm coming. Well, that was 5 years ago. And now
There you are.
the Entree Capital reports to me. It's crazy how this works. And it is an institution that, among other things that are happening across the country, has been created because of an institutional problem with our society.
And is it national?
It is right now. It's in Texas.
Okay, because everything that you're doing, Chip, I want to be national. And the reason I say that, Chip, is because I have the opportunity with this show that I get so many people that are doing so many great things, but it's all like in silos. There's really good stuff going over here in Michigan, and then there's Jay Jordan over in California, and then there's Tara Simmons, who I interviewed. She's doing incredible things up in Washington. I would love to see something like this of what you're doing to be able to spread out and become a national thing, because it's needed everywhere. It's important.
Well, the fact of the matter
everywhere.
is, what you just said, Brent, is absolutely true. There are great people doing great work around, but what there has not been yet is that tipping point where we get together and begin to have a collective voice.
One voice.
And really learn from each other. And that collaborative kind of spirit that, we look to foster here.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. I feel a momentum. I know you do too.
Well, and I think that, there's just too many out there. There's 26 million, some say 70 million. There's a huge number. We're talking about 330 million in the United States. So it's a big number. If it could come as a one voice thing, somehow one umbrella under, and everybody can get what they need, it would be big. But it's people like you, Chip, that are doing what you're doing that makes that idea possible.
Well, Brent,
hopefully you don't run out of gas, because we need you out there doing it.
I have food that you do not know of. No, I will say this, Brent, and I know you are my brother about this. I am convinced that the great leadership that is going to be forged and is being forged in those dark places, in those prison cells, those men and women that come out will be the ones that lead our society into that next great place
Yeah.
where men and women are willing to sacrifice for each other, where it is not about my well-being, it's about the well-being of my neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and welcoming home and loving those on the margins of our society becomes the hallmark of our society.
Amen. That's so true. Well, Chip, after everything that you've been through, and I mean, it's been a journey, for the listeners out there, what do you think is your greatest takeaway through all this?
My greatest takeaway is that as a believer, as a follower of Jesus, the good news that I have received means that I am empowered, enabled, actually mandated to go and actually enjoy and promote the prospering of everyone around me. It is not contingent on whether they, believe what I believe or not, or see things the way I see it or not. It is my privilege to go and to love people regardless of where they've come from, how they speak, what their traditions are. I just get to go and actually promote their thriving. And, if there's anything here at the Prison Entrepreneurship Program that we're focused on, it's upward economic mobility, right? We don't like to measure metrics of failure. We want to see thriving. And I really do think that, as believers, we should be keenly interested in human thriving.
Yes.
I mean, that's what it is. And that becomes
makes everything better.
Right. That becomes the attraction. There's no, but you have to do this first.
That's right.
It's just come as you are.
I love it. It's a great answer. I knew you'd give me a great answer on that, Chip.
Well, you didn't give me a moment to throw me on the spot.
So, with PEP, what's the best way that somebody who's listening to this, how can they reach out and help? What's
PEP.org. Go to the
best
website.
way to do it?
Yeah, 100%. We have, the thing that I love about being here is that we have a staff that is almost to a person. We have 2 staff members, I believe, that have not done time.
Mm-hmm.
So we have about 35 staff members, and anyone who calls and is interested in being a part of this community, look, this is a staff that knows how precious that is.
Yep.
So we welcome anyone who wants to, whether it's time, treasure, or talent, doesn't matter.
I love it.
We value it all.
Well, you just said your bunkmate is coming on board, which is awesome. And I think that we just hit on something too, Chip, that I think is one of the things that's missing in a lot of these organizations. Is a lot of people that haven't experienced that. Getting some of those people around the table that have walked in all these places, and they're there talking about the solutions because they know what the issues are. That also speeds things up. It really does. Yeah.
Well, it helps us be wise.
It helps us be wise.
We do things, and we've both seen the government try to take affirmative steps, and because they are not wise, they wind up hurting people as opposed to actually helping.
A lot of the barriers are there. I mean, a lot of the barriers that are there for reentry have been created through legislation, and it's one of those things. I remember interviewing Jay Jordan, and he brought in California a whole wall and up to Sacramento, and it was a huge wall, and it was all the barriers of statutes for reentry. And the legislators came out to look at the wall, and they said, "I just can't believe that this is right. How could we have this many laws that stop you from getting back into society?" But he, in the course of things, Jay Jordan is one of the doers, and 44 laws have been changed because of him. But Chip, thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate you taking your time. I want to also thank Homestead Financial. It lets me use all this fancy stuff in here. If you've got home mortgage needs, Greg Afdiev is your guy. He knows all that stuff. I know it's a hassle, but if you got time, the reviews on Apple, and I love it when you guys go do it, and we've got a bunch of them on there, but it puts the show on steroids. If you want to know anything more about me, go to brentcassidy.com. I spell it wrong. I spell it with a TY instead of a DY. Yeah, I was growing up. I wanted to be Sean and David, and there's no relation at all. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Chip, thanks, my man. I love your mission.
Thanks,
Keep it
brother.
going, man.
Thanks, brother.
Nightmare success, in and out.